Thank you, everyone. Just so you know, January is National Human Trafficking Awareness, and we had Prevention Month. So we have an event each year, and this year I want to thank the City of Caldwell. I want to thank MIAC for partnering with us to bring this presentation to everyone. It is an important topic to discuss, and I also want to reiterate Brian's welcome to our guests tonight. You may be, first of all, I have been attending these meetings for about 3 months, and it's just been a delight to be here. You all are just welcoming, warm, and full of energy. It's great to see you break up into your subcommittee groups. I know you have one subcommittee group on human trafficking, so it's just wonderful to see you get down to work and provide all these services for the city. So thank you for that work, that commitment. You may be wondering right about now, what do I need to know about sex trafficking for? And even more importantly, what am I going to do with this information? But when you have a basic understanding of what sex trafficking is and what can lead to sex trafficking with sexual predators, you will be far more aware of those situations you find yourselves in your lives, where there are warning signs, red flags that tell you you may be in the presence of a sexual predator. And that helps you to tune into that gut feeling that something doesn't feel quite right. And that will give you the courage to act on those feelings, to disengage from that situation, to walk away, and to seek help if you need it. It's a life skill, and it's a life skill you all need. You may never need it, but you probably will draw on this skill at some point in your life, especially when you're young. So tonight, that skill development begins. Chief Ingram reached out to us a year ago and invited me to meet with him for the first time, and I learned a little bit about his background in law enforcement. And that was when he shared with me his involvement with human trafficking. So Chief Ingram spent most of his life growing up in Los Angeles, California. He began his career in law enforcement as a teenager and spent almost 17 years working for the Los Angeles Police Department. In that capacity, he served as a supervisor for many different types of positions, and he has extensive training and educational background too in law enforcement. But one of the positions he held was as commander of the Human Trafficking Task Force. So tonight he's going to share some of his background experience in that subject area and educate us a little bit on, not just you, but all of us, on how that relates to us here where we live in our lives. So would you please welcome Caldwell Police Chief Rex Ingram.
Wow, what an honor. You guys mind if I walk around a little bit? I've been sitting at the Capitol all day and I feel like I'm a little antsy. So thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for that introduction. I don't think it's ever been said so perfectly without anything, like notes or whatever. But yeah, essentially, I've been doing this job for about 20 years now as far as law enforcement. I have 4 kids of my own that are 12 and 9. And who does the math? Who do the math on? 4 kids are 12 and 9. Do the math. 2 sets of twins, that's right. Good answer. Yes, you guys heard that right. So I have a vested interest in our community and specifically the most vulnerable population of our nation, which is you guys, kids, right? And human trafficking has no boundaries, guys. Human trafficking doesn't really discriminate against age, sex, religion, gender. It affects everyone. And so, but it starts like things like tonight. So a little bit about my background. I spent a lot of time in an undercover capacity working in an area called Hollywood. Anyone know where Hollywood's at? Yeah, okay. It was on fire last week. But spent a lot of time undercover in Hollywood rescuing victims from 11 years old to mid-20s. And I was very proud of the work there. And I'll tell a quick story about an incident that we had in Hollywood. I had a young lady that I met when she was 14. I knew her for about 3 years. And and she was dressed as a police officer, and she was acting as a street walking prostitute. I ended up giving her a break, and she had a ticket, a one-way ticket to Miami, Florida, and said, "You will never see me again, Officer Ingram." At the time I was an officer. And I said, "Okay, well, that's why I'm going to give you a break. You're not going to go to jail. You're going to go straight to Florida." About 6 years later, I'm at a double homicide. That's a murder, two murders. The mom and the dad got executed in the car, and there were two babies in the backseat. One was an infant, one was a toddler with no parents. And it's a huge crime scene. A lot of people are, hooting and hollering, and I'm there. And this lady comes walking up to me in front of all my cops, and she says, "Ingram, can I talk to you?" And I'm like, "Who is this girl? This is random." And she said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No, I don't know who you are. I'm sorry." And she said, "You saved my life 6 years ago in Hollywood when you got me off the blade and you sent me to Florida." And I had an epiphany, right? And she said, "Now I'm here, and that's my husband over there. He doesn't know what I used to do when I was a kid. Don't tell him anything. But I'm here with diapers and formula, and let me take possession of these kids, because obviously the mom is no longer around," right? So that was a full circle experience for me, to see a girl that was 14 who was running from us and was trafficked and wanted nothing to do with cops or even with her trafficker, to coming full circle, coming back to Los Angeles 6 years later, and now she's an adult, and she really was, trying to help us help this family in need. So anyway, that's a quick little story. I've traveled all over the country testifying in courts as for human trafficking investigations and cases. Later on in my career, I oversaw the Human Trafficking Task Force, and that was a very pivotal moment in my life where I realized that through legislation at the state and stuff, where we're able to actually help kids. What we know about human trafficking is that not everyone comes from a vulnerable house. Not everyone comes from a broken home, right? But does anyone in here like expensive clothing? Okay, who likes the flossy stuff? No? You guys see that stuff on TV? Yeah, okay, raise your hand. What do you like?
It's not the worst thing. No, but just nice
Good, yeah, technology, right? Who likes nice cars? Okay? Yeah. So what happens is, okay, this is a real talk conversation too, and so this is coming from my heart and my experience, not what the speech says or what ChatGPT says. Okay, this is what I say. And so what these traffickers do is they try to get kids your age in here, young adults, to buy into what they have going on. If you look at it at the lowest level, they're leaders. These traffickers are leaders, okay? And they're manipulative. And they try to manipulate their victims by throwing out flashy things. Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Prada, Fendi, nice cars. They'll pay your parents' mortgage for them, They come across as very nice, charming, maybe even your boyfriend. They might even try to be your boyfriend for a little bit. And then, once they get full control over you and they control your family, then they take you and they start moving you across the United States of America and into different areas, and that's where we get involved, hopefully get involved. But a lot of the, now with social media, like when I was working, the first time I worked these undercover units, Facebook was not around. MySpace was around. And people didn't really have access to smartphones. They had these things called flip phones, and to send a message, you had to press things like 3 times, and so it was a lot harder. But the reason why these pimps, these traffickers, are doing these types of things now is because it's all about what? What are they trying to do? They're trying to make money, okay? Because guns and narcotics and evidence does not lie when they go to court. But what does lie? What can lie? People, right? So they know, these traffickers know that they can manipulate their victims so much that you, as a victim, are willing to do whatever they say, including giving up all your money they make to give to them, because they're going to get taken care of. And so it's very tough, but thankfully there's legislation that has been passed, federal law and state laws, that we just passed here in Idaho last year. Thankfully the legislator passed it. Thank you, Councilman Allgood, for being involved in that. But it actually makes it against the law a felony to commit human trafficking. And what they do is they go on Who plays Fortnite? Come on, raise your hand. No guy lie to kick it. Okay, Fortnite. What about, who's on TikTok? Yep. Who's on Facebook? Instagram. Yeah, okay. So these traffickers are also on those platforms. All right? Who's on Kick? The app Kick. Who's on the dark web? You don't have to admit it. But some of you guys are in here because 1 out of every 10 people is at the victim of human trafficking. That's what the data shows. So what I'm telling you is, and my parents in here, my adults, be mindful of things that your kids are on. All right? Pay attention to what your children are doing, because I can tell you that maybe 90% of the human trafficking cases that I personally was involved in started off online. And it started off by someone pretending to be some casting agent or some producer that had a flashy car and a couple gold watches and stuff. And they basically got into a friendship relationship with usually a young lady between 10 to 18 years old. But the younger our children are, the more vulnerable they are, right? Because they're not as developed in the head and the brain. So they're more compulsive to making decisions. And the next thing you know, they're getting on an airplane. Am I done?
So we have some people online that are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, online people. Okay, I guess I'll stay here. Thank you. So what they do is they entice these children. They'll pay for them to go to the airport, and they'll fly them somewhere. And a lot of the times, the families are aware of it. The families actually might take the child to the airport and send them off on their way. And then before you know it, sometimes they never see them again. And I've rescued hundreds of girls that, would get into my car, and we start talking, and by the end of the night, they tell me the whole story of how they're trafficked. And it usually starts with some sort of online gaming, Fortnite, that kind of stuff, or on TikTok or these social media platforms. And then the next thing you know, they're trafficked. So a lot of the things that I talk about is relevant to this group right here, but really it's the older population in the room that have young kids or grandkids or whatever that we really want to focus on. And it's in a state like Idaho, we're not going to see the blatant street walking prostitution that you see in other states across the country. But I-84, you guys know what I-84 is? Yeah, it's a big freeway here. So I-84 connects southern Idaho, or actually it's an interstate, it goes all the way across the state, but really up to Oregon and Washington and up to Canada, right? So what this is a circuit, okay? The term is called the circuit for a larger network of human trafficking. So what they do is they'll start it, up by the Canadian border in Washington State. They'll go to Seattle, they'll go to Portland, they'll go down through the Bay Area, San Francisco, Bakersfield, Central Valley, anywhere where there's people, there's clients that want to pay for that stuff, they'll have these victims go there. And then they'll end up down in San Diego, go up to Vegas, go back up to Salt Lake City, cut across Twin Falls, Boise, and then they do this big circuit for about a month or two. And we know when we stop these traffickers, they have a lot of clothing in the car, they have a lot of expensive stuff in the car, and they have girls, mostly 3 to 5 girls in each, we call them stables, because they treat them like animals, so they refer to the girls as a stable. And the girls are taught not to talk to us, and they're taught not to talk to anyone. But the good thing is we have these laws that basically say if someone's under 18, we don't necessarily have to prove that they had knowledge of it. They're a juvenile, so they can't make informed consent decisions, and the state then makes the decision for them and does that. I had a case in South Central LA where we rescued a girl. She was 15 years old. She met one of my officers in a hotel room, got completely naked for the officer, and of course we didn't know her age at the time, right? And then we find out a couple minutes later that she's a minor. And her trafficker was in the parking lot, so we were able to get him in custody too. They're from Northern California on this big circuit, right? We were able to get him into custody, and within a day, he bails out of jail, okay? And then she ran away from the victim advocate service place that we placed her in. We end up finding out through social media that she's posting back up in her hometown in Northern California. And so we have the Northern California agencies do another operation for us because we weren't going to drive up there and to get her because he had a court date coming up in 2 weeks. And so while he's out on bail, what is he doing? He's trafficking his victims, and this girl was one of them. And so we ended up having a week-long trial up in Napa, California, and getting him convicted to life sentence, to life in prison for trafficking a minor. But his whole defense was, I didn't know she was a minor, I didn't know she was a minor. So much so that his grandpa was actually the main high school football coach in the town where he's from, and he came to court and testified on our behalf, okay? And this was a kid, a young man, he was, I think, 21, 22 years old, that started dating young girls and then saw the money in it and basically held her against her will and took her all over and manipulated her through coercion and through flashy things and Gucci stuff and, but she has no voice. And what they do is they take your phone from you and they'll put in Life 360, which is what? A tracking app, okay? They'll put in Life 360 or they'll give you their phone, one of their phones that has all the technology built in, and they will control every move. And it's scary. It's scary because it starts online and it starts, unfortunately, sometimes at schools. And so we got to be very cognizant about that, and we have to talk about these things. And I'm so proud that we have Ms. Kraft here that wants to partner with us and do this. The good thing is we don't really have a big problem here in the Treasure Valley or in the state of Idaho, but it's coming, because anytime you have humans, you're going to have sex trafficking. That's just the way it works. So we're a proud partner of all the things that we do here, and just honored to be here. And I just want to, I guess, yield my time for questions, and if anyone has any questions that we can help answer. Yes, ma'am.
What are some signs that somebody's going through that?
I'm going to repeat the question, that way people online can hear the question. So, Devona, you said, what are some signs to look for, I guess, in people who are being trafficked? Okay.
So that's a good question. So what are some signs? So I would say isolation, acting differently, not showing up to class, maybe starting to dress pretty flashy, with nice things and out of the blue. Now haven't seen that much here in Idaho, but that's generally what happens in bigger cities across the country. Is you'll have female student. Usually they don't show up to school anymore, but if they do, they would start coming to school because now what they're trying to do is recruit other girls to join that pimp, right? That trafficker. And so the other thing is controlling the family, and especially in certain vulnerable populations of our community, different demographics, you see a lot trafficking more prevalent because sometimes, especially like in the undocumented community, people are afraid of getting involved with law enforcement because they think they're going to get deported, right? So then they might not report that their mija has been trafficked by someone. So we try to really build those relationships with those specifically those communities, especially in Idaho, Southwest Idaho. A lot of agriculture and undocumented citizens and stuff. So we really try to get to them to let them know it's okay to talk to us. We are not ICE. We are not going to deport you. We are going to facilitate whatever we can to get your child back and keep you here and live the American dream. But if you start seeing something that's out of the ordinary, it doesn't even have to be trafficking. Depression and teen suicide is super, super high, right? And so if you start seeing one of your friends or you or whoever start going through some sort of life-changing, events or whatever, tell your teacher. Tell someone. And generally speaking, there's usually going to be smoke where there's fire. Great question. What else? No questions?
Can you explain sextortion?
Sextortion?
The question
that's
is,
a great question.
Can you explain sextortion?
Yes.
Okay.
So who's got smartphones? Don't lie. Okay. So I don't want to show any hands right now, but there's probably a lot of you in here that have sent inappropriate pictures to someone in your life. Okay. And what happens is when that picture gets out there, once you press send, you can't take that back, right? And when that gets into someone's hands that wants to extort you, which means basically blackmailing you to try to get you to do something, or they're going to release something, that's generally how they have power. Now, a lot of the times in human trafficking cases, but just in life in general, you know, we see this in politics and stuff. It's about leverage. And that's literally what the traffickers have over you is leverage, okay? Especially if your parents are undocumented or if they have warrants or something like that, they will use that to say, oh, I'm just gonna have your parents deported and you're gonna be living with me, right, if you don't cooperate with me. And so it starts off with what you send people, okay? So I would tell you as a law enforcement officer, as a father, and just as another human being, don't send people anything you never want to see again, because they will, if it's in the wrong hands, they will use that against you and try to get you to basically have that bait over you so you comply with their, that's a great question. Is there anything else you want me to talk on that? The room's kind of young, so I don't want to.
They can take it.
What else? Any questions, guys? Any questions? Yes, in the back.
Can you explain the fact that when you do send a picture that's inappropriate, you have just sent pornography, and that is a chargeable offense? And a lot of these kids don't realize that if you send a picture to somebody, if it's a picture of yourself, and you're a minor, you just broke the law.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you, ma'am. That's a great question. So, you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
So the question was, or more of a statement, can I explain to the room that if a minor sends a inappropriate pornographic picture to someone else, it's technically a crime? And yeah, yes it is, but there's not one police officer, I don't think, in this country that's gonna charge a minor for sending something if they're truly a victim. And so there's kind of a mindset shift in the country right now, and you know, thankfully, everyone's on the same page. It doesn't matter if you're red or blue, Republican, Democrat, whatever, we can all agree on that human trafficking is a national crisis, but it starts off like sending these pictures. And so prostitution used to be illegal, and but we slowly transitioned to victimization, right? Instead of arresting prostitutes, arresting a girl 15 years old for prostitution, we're now rescuing them and then providing services to try to get them to roll or flip on their trafficker. But the point is that if you send something, guys, that is child porn, technically, our stance is we want to go after the person that, usually an adult, that receives that pornography. But technically speaking, I mean, is it porn? Yes, but you know, it's all based on case-by-case basis, and I don't want to sit here and tell you that you're going to go to jail if you send someone a picture. It's all depends on, you know, who receives it and what they do with it. But there will be questions that have to be answered. If you do send something and law enforcement gets it, we're going to ask you, how did they get that picture? And if you start denying things like, I don't know, you know, well, then there's a different story. So, great question. Yes, sir.
I was kind of wondering if you know, like, that sex trafficking is going on. What's the proper way about, like, going and reporting? Do you go straight to the police, or is there, like,
Yes.
certain, like, resources for
Straight to the police. Like if you're talking about school, I would go to your school staff. They're all mandated reporters. If they, you know, if they're aware of a crime and they have an obligation per the law to report that crime to us. We are mandated reporters as well. So, you know, we have to do an investigation, right? So I would pick up the phone and call us and let us know, and we'll absolutely investigate that. Does anyone go to In-N-Out Burger? Yes? Man, everyone's so lively in here. All that, you wore them all out, Brian. You guys were all dancing and doing handshakes and stuff. Has anyone been there in the last, what's today, the 13th, 15th? In the last 15 days? Have you walked up to the counter? Did you see anything at the counter at In-N-Out? People, that's a good observation. So if you go up to any counter for the month of January at In-N-Out Burger, you will see donation boxes and propaganda that is for human trafficking, anti-human trafficking. And they are a huge, huge, huge business that supports this cause that we're talking about tonight. And they even say, if you know, you can report it to us and we will report it to law enforcement. So that's a good, you know, if you're there and you see something, you can always tell them and they'll call the police right away. What other question? Yes, sir.
Traffickers, the LA experience, they take young ladies across the
Good question, sir. The question was if, in my experience in LA, do traffickers take victims to Mexico, and does Mexico cooperate with us, and what do they do with these young ladies? The first answer is I've never known of a case of a trafficker going into Mexico with a victim from California, or from anywhere for that matter. Primarily because, they are going to get stopped at the border going into Mexico and questioned, and most traffickers don't look like people that would be going to Mexico. So they would be questioned, and the Mexican authorities don't play games. They're not as soft as American police officers and the authority here. They're no nonsense. And the second part of your question is, do they cooperate with us? Yes, they sure do. We've had a great relationship as far as down there in Southern California with fugitives, people that have murdered police officers and have gone to Mexico. They're very good with our marshal service at returning that person. Yes, ma'am.
I really don't know form the question, but so outside of social media, I know there's ways of people trying to traffic you in real life. So I'm mixing with the people with the cars. So how exactly what are the signs of looking out for that, and just being safe and staying away from that?
Well, thank you for your question. The question was, what are the signs in real life to look for to stay away from traffickers? And so, I think you just got to be aware of your surroundings. And if someone new tries to come into your friend group, usually a male, have questions, right? Ask questions and try to vet them and do whatever you can to try to see who they are. As far as kidnappings and stuff like that, that does happen. It's very rare. We did have a case in Nampa about a year ago where this guy came up in a pickup truck and basically tried to get a girl to come to his truck to talk to him. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what his intention was at the time, but what he told law enforcement was that he just wanted to ask her what time it was. So, but there was really no other crime other than trying to get her to come to his car, right? But we all know that nothing good comes from that, okay? So I would tell you guys, if someone approaches you, don't talk to them, right? Don't talk to strangers. But the problem is with these people is they will come up in nice cars, Teslas, Cybertrucks. I mean, all the new things that are coming out, guys. They'll use those. They'll rent those cars, and they will approach you and try to get you to come in to their car. And there's different. Each culture has a different way of trafficking its people, right? Hispanics do it a certain way. African Americans do it a certain way. White people do it a certain way, and so they basically do whatever they know is the thing to do to get their, what they're familiar with into their life. Generally speaking, though, a lot of the girls are vulnerable because they might be having an issue. They don't have a dad at home or whatever, or they might, and they're just rebelling. There's all sides of it. I had a case. Where this mom called the station. I was a watch commander, and she said, "Hey, can you have an officer please come here because my daughter has a ticket to go to Arizona tomorrow morning to meet her boyfriend, and she's 15 and she's autistic." And I said, "Well, that's a little more than meeting her boyfriend. Why are you going to take her to the airport?" "Well, because he said he's going to pay my mortgage. He's 30 years old and he's a millionaire." So is that a problem? Yes. There's no person in this country that would think that's acceptable. So instead of sending an officer out there that probably is going to not understand the gravity of the situation, I drove out there and actually spent several hours at this house with this family and had dinner with them and tried to convince her to listen to her mom because she's mentally ill, right? She has a disability and she doesn't really comprehend what's happening. And this guy met her through a friend at school and told his buddy in Arizona, and then that guy got a hold of her and started sending her pictures and stuff and online, and thankfully she didn't go. But good question. Yes.
In your case, how close have the traffickers been to their victims?
So 45%, that's a great question. How close in my case have traffickers been to their victims? Based on the Department of Justice statistics, 45%, nearly 45% of victims are familiar with their trafficker. So, 1 in every 2 people, essentially, right? Half of the people. That's not to say it can't happen, but generally speaking, what we see in the high school years is someone that has that charismatic, charming, ladies' man, baller type personality will have a girlfriend or something if they're if they're going to do that stuff, and they'll start off as romantic stuff and go to dances together, and then after they get out is when they start fully controlling, especially because they know the family, and they can manipulate the family. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
We talk about, young girls being trafficked, but boys and young men can be it as well.
Yes.
And we also wonder about the fact that adults or traffickers are not just men, that they're women as well. Is that true? In most cases, it's men, but that I haven't seen or heard that there are women that are also traffickers.
Great question. So the question for the audience online is, most cases traffickers are men, some cases they're women, and some cases the victims are young boys as well and young men. Yes, that is all true. In my experience, I would say 99.9% of the time, the man was the suspect and the victim was a female. But I can tell you that certain cultures, in the Asian culture, the women are the traffickers. You know, when you see, not all massage parlors, but most of them, the pimp is an elderly woman of Asian descent, and they control, that it's a different type, right? It's a different type of sex trafficking, but we see those in Boise and Meridian. There's massage parlors all over the place. What they do is they get, now it's like family controlled. So they get young ladies to come over from Asia, from different countries in Asia, and they basically say, hey, we're gonna get you to the United States to work. We're gonna get you a work visa and get you, on the up and up. And what they do when they get here, they take their passport and all that stuff, and then they force them into those massage parlors for indefinite periods of time. Those cases are very, very hard to work, simply because that culture is so tight, it's hard to get in and infiltrate and get people to, to cooperate. And usually they're not minors, they're adults. So, 20 to 35, I've even arrested a 65-year-old woman that was doing it. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said before, it doesn't discriminate against anyone, right? All walks of life can be victims or traffickers, but specifically with street walking or online sex trafficking, 100%, I've never arrested someone that was not a male as the trafficker.
And how many children in Idaho have been sex trafficked or sold?
That's a good question. How many children in Idaho have been sex trafficked or sold? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know, Ms. Kraft might, but I can tell you anecdotally, it's not gonna be a lot. And the tricky part is with sex trafficking or human trafficking, it is so underreported because of all those things that I talked to you guys about: manipulation, control, power, leverage, right? And we've had cases across the country that the victim is super supportive, they wanna work with us, they tell us the whole story, and they don't show up to court. And then we gotta find them because they're on the run, and the pimp got them again, right? So it's all about control, it's about coercion, manipulation, brainwashing. I mean, really, like the Stockholm syndrome comes into effect where they love their trafficker.
We have time for one more question.
One more question. Yes, ma'am.
Whenever someone rescued from human sex trafficking, what does the recovery process look like for the victim?
Great question. So the question is, whenever someone is rescued from human trafficking, what does the recovery process look like for the victim? It depends. It depends on how resilient that person is, but I will tell you there will be lifelong traumas and PTSD. I mean, I have a lot of trauma from those encounters, now having children myself. Every time I see a young girl that's trafficked, I see my daughter, right? And so it depends. It depends on the resources. It depends on the state they're in, because some states don't have good resources like other states do. It just, and also too, how good it is in the family and the home life. It's one thing to rescue them from the game, but it's another thing to keep them out of the game, because sometimes it's not like a drug. They get addicted to that lifestyle. They get addicted to, the nice flashy stuff, and they're willing to do whatever to put food on their parents' table. So it just depends on the case. But great question. One more question? She's pointing to someone back there. No? Any questions, comments, concerns?
Well, thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You'll be around a little bit
Yes.
for questions at the
Yes.
end. Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. I'm gonna pull the exec up here. Can we cut the stream if you don't mind? And you guys can give your last couple announcements and closing remarks.